All right. So it says we are live. Now the question is, does it show up? Yeah, see, this is the all right. We are testing something new, and this is what I was a little bit worried about. All right, hold on. Where is this thing? Yeah, this would be, I think there is a lag,
Okay. Well,
but
my wife is supposed to watch it, so I'll see if she's been able to access it.
okay. Yeah, so why? Okay, so it says I'm live. Yeah, see, this is, damn it. I knew it.
Do you want to go back? Do you want to go back to Is there a way that you would do it on your phone or something?
Yeah, but you have to have a stand. And though this should be working. This is what, let's see. This is, oh my God, I'm sorry. Let me just see here. So, okay, because usually it would show up. Let me just put my phone. It should show up in here. I went through it once with the guy from Substack, and it worked. So this is where I'm really sorry about this.
No. Don't be silly. I've had many
Okay,
worse
all right.
things.
Wait. The email just went out, so I think maybe we're live, and they're all hearing us talking
I
about.
clicked on it and I can see us. I can see us
Okay,
on the on the link.
so I guess we are live. Sorry, everyone. We are testing a new way to do this, so a little bit of a technical issue on my side. All right, great. Well, all of you got to hear the sort of technical blabber from me. Apologies. Thank you for joining. I'm really happy today. We have Finbarr Berningham, who's a senior correspondent at the South China Morning Post. You're based in Brussels, right?
That's right.
And he has been just a scoop machine about EU-China relations, and specifically the EU-China summit that convenes on Thursday in Beijing. So I thought it'd be great to have a conversation about EU-China relations, and specifically what to expect at the summit, and how and what is the state of EU-China relations. So thank you all for joining. This is a live recording, a live discussion, but there will also be recording that goes up on the Cynicism website and into my Cynicism podcast feed sometime probably later today, Tuesday. And we're recording at 11 a.m. Eastern time Tuesday, which is 5 p.m. in Brussels, correct?
It's 5 p.m. here, yes.
So hoping to see a beverage in your hand. It's cocktail hour, right? So
I wish. I've got a cup of tea and I've got a glass of water. That's very disappointing for an Irishman in Belgium.
I was
should be doing much better.
I was going to say, but anyway, well, thank you. And so quickly, if you could just tell everyone, just tell us about yourself, your background, what you do at the South China Post, and then set the stage for what's happening this week.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Bill, first of all, for having me. I've been subscribing to your newsletter for it must be 8 years or something like that.
Thank you. Too long,
yeah.
whatever it is, but thank you.
So I mean, I'm the Europe correspondent for SCMP, work in Brussels, and been doing that job for 4 years. And I guess I moved right at about the right time in terms of when the news actually started flowing. The month after I moved, before I moved, was when they first exchanged sanctions over Xinjiang and stuff like that. So it was starting to heat up. Before that, I was based in Hong Kong for 7 years, a couple of which was with the Post. I was hired as a sort of professional trade journalist back in 2018 to help manage the coverage of the US-China trade war. So I was in that sort of geeky world of nuts and bolts trade journalism where nobody really knew what I do. And then my elevator pitch became much shorter when Trump first got elected, because I could talk to people about tariffs and export controls and stuff like that.
No, it was a hot beat.
It's a weird thing, he's a bad guy, but sometimes the world turns a little bit towards you, and Trump can do that for you as well. I'm sure, your traffic, I'm sure, goes through the roof in these times. But yeah, I was in and around Asia for a little while. Before that, I was in South Korea, and I worked in London and across the UK, and that's where I am here. And I suppose, yeah, this it feels like all roads have been leading to this summit for ages. It feels like my life's work over the last 6 months has been dedicated to this measly meeting, which is quite pathetic, really. But it's been quite fruitful. Like there's been a lot of politics, a lot of fallouts, a lot of fighting, and for journalists, that's generally good copy.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, we're here to talk about the big event on Thursday. I mean, it's a one-day summit in Beijing. At various points, it has been slated as a two-day summit. So right now the final schedule is a one-day summit. So von der Leyen and Ursula von der Leyen, who is the European Commission president, and
Hmm.
Antonio Costa, who is the European Council president, and Kaya Kallas, who is basically the foreign minister, the de facto foreign minister, are in Osaka at the moment at the Expo, and then they're meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister tomorrow. All about the timing, just after his party
Hmm. Right.
lost in the parliamentary election, and then they're on to Beijing to meet Xi Jinping on Thursday morning and Li Qiang on Thursday afternoon, and there's a sort of business roundtable on the margins of this. It was supposed to be 2 days. The Chinese had initially proposed that they have a second day in Hefei in Anhui province, and then the Chinese subsequently proposed that they cancel that. So they didn't propose; they just unilaterally cancelled it. So it's a one-day summit.
And do we know why they canceled it? Was it they weren't getting what they wanted, or because there had been talk that it was supposed to be like a showcase of Chinese EVs in Hefei, right, which is a big center for the EV industry, and maybe the EU side decided the optics weren't great, or were there other issues there? Do you
No,
know?
it didn't come from the EU side. It was on the Chinese side.
Interesting.
So there's several layers to it. I mean, officially, what they've been told, it's because Li Qiang can't be away from Beijing on the Friday, and I would defer to your knowledge on that. Perhaps there is, and this does happen in China, where the top brass have to be around. Maybe there's something going
Interesting.
on.
Well, there is. We are waiting for the July Politburo meeting, which is, sums up the first half economic performance. Historically, the July Politburo meeting is about the economy. First half talks about the first half performance,
Yeah.
and then sets sort of high level direction for the second half. And so it is that meeting will be in the next 9 days, right? Because
So yeah, that's what
it
I
could
thought.
be
It could
that.
be. But also, there's sort of the other side of it is that when Wang Yi was in Brussels earlier in this month, he warned them already that the summit could be truncated. I don't know. I've seen it reported elsewhere that he cancelled it while he was in Brussels. I didn't hear that much. I heard that he told them, "Look, guys, this is not going very well. I think we're going to have to sort of chop you down a peg or two, and not in so many words." So I think there's a combination of perhaps there is something going on domestically that I don't know about, but also the mood music was awful. It was
Right.
terrible, and for several, I don't know, maybe it was a sort of a way of telling the EU we're not happy with you. I thought it would have been quite unusual if the EU, so another layer to why it was going to be in Hefei, as well as it being a big Volkswagen base and as well as it being a big sort of showcase of electric vehicles, Ursula von der Leyen's dad, when he was the
Oh,
Prime
right.
Minister of Lower Saxony, he created this partnership with Anhui province, which still survives to this day. So it was all about setting, the tone and creating a good news story. So regardless of what happens on the first day, then they can sort of at least spin this one out.
And it is the 50th anniversary of EU China relations, right? So this is all sort of part of that, setting, like you said, setting that sort of mood music and saying, look, we have ties that go back, at least another generation.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean that makes sense to me. I mean that's exactly the sort of thing the Chinese do very well, is play into these. They love it, the anniversary, the sort of showmanship and the showpiece occasion. So who knows? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle,
right?
Like where Li Chang couldn't be away, or perhaps it wasn't expedient for him to be outside of Beijing.
It wasn't convenient.
And they also told, and they also told them that day one looks pretty bare now, because you're just going to have your meeting with President Xi in the morning, so we want to flesh out that day as well. So I mean,
so there's no banquet scheduled. There'd been some talk that there might
there are
be
two banquets. There's a banquet lunch with a working lunch with Xi Jinping, and then there's an afternoon or suppose early evening meal with Li Chang. So they're going to do a press conference after this. So they're going to be pretty full up, and then they'll roll onto a plane back to
literally
Brussels.
Interesting. Yeah. So one question, right, is these summits, they have a cadence to them. Last year was in China. This year was supposed to be in Brussels, right? Why did the EU decide they're going to break that precedent and go back to China? Because from the outside, at least, it looks like it looks. I think the Chinese side would see it as well. They really are kind of eager to get a deal, so they're going to come back again.
Yeah, I heard you and Andrew talking about this on your Sharp China podcast. So you obviously have discussed it at length. So there was no summit last year. It was in 2023. There's a sort of a semantic and a logistical disagreement about what this summit actually is. If you look at the announcement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs earlier this week, they say that the summit is in the afternoon with Li Chang, and that the EU leaders will also have.
All right, we have lost Finbarr. Sorry, apologies for those on here. We're having some technical issues. Let me see. I know he's in a hotel right now, and so I don't know if we've got a Wi-Fi issue or what's going on. So just bear with us for a second. I'm trying to get in touch with him and see if we can get him back. Let's see. Okay, so we are. Here we go. Hi, Finbarr. How are you?
I'm good. Sorry, I don't know what happened there, but my laptop just absolutely crapped its pants.
Oh, oh man, I'm so sorry. Because you froze for about 20 seconds and then we heard you. So you were. If this works, will this is on your phone? You think this will work? You good?
It'll work. I'll just hold it here. Sorry, the technical side was playing up. But where did you lose me?
So I lost you when I asked about the sort of EU going again to Beijing for the summit, rather than the expectation that the Chinese side would go to Brussels this year.
Yeah. So so there was no summit in 2024. There was a summit in 2023, and you know. The Chinese persist. They insist that the summit is not supposed to be with Xi Jinping in the first place. It's supposed to be with Li Chang. And so there's been these arguments over the sort of choreography as well as the seniority of who the summit is with. During COVID, they were able to involve Xi Jinping in the summits because it was online. He didn't have to travel anywhere. So,
right.
You know, they are right, I suppose, technically to say that Xi Jinping doesn't travel to Europe for these summits. So they were trying to arrange for Xi Jinping to come to Brussels for the summit at the start of the year, and they were told very early on that, well, no, Xi would not travel to Europe for a summit. He has no intention of going to Europe this year. To which the EU folks pointed out, well, he's planning to be in Moscow for the World War II
in early May.
Yeah, anniversary. That wasn't considered to be Europe, I suppose, by the Chinese guys involved. And then there was a call between Li Chang and von der Leyen, during which she basically accepted an invitation to go to Beijing. And the seeds of this had been earlier in the year when Costa spoke with Xi Jinping in January. And so there had been a sort of a discussion back and forth. The EU had gone as far to rustle out the Belgian government and the Belgian king to see if they would arrange for a state visit for Xi Jinping to come, but he wasn't having any of it. So when it became clear that Xi wasn't coming to Brussels, they decided that they would go to Beijing. And the logic was, well, if you believe that there's only one person in the EU, in the Chinese system, who really matters, who there's one guy that you need to talk to get anything changed, and you have to go to Beijing to do that, then the logic was, well, then, okay, we should do that. We shouldn't be so sort of, stubborn as to pass up this opportunity to give Xi Jinping our views unvarnished. I mean, they always say he doesn't hear this stuff from anybody else on Ukraine,
Right.
particularly. And so I sort of sympathize with that argument.
I get it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what, what do you think will be the outcomes of the summit, right? Because I mean, I think at the beginning of the year, Trump becomes president. Obviously President Trump is engaging in there's a lot of disruption around the trading system. There's some pretty significant tensions in the EU-US relationship, and might even be getting worse over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I think that the Chinese, it certainly looked like the Chinese had an opening to really improve relations with the EU. And yet heading into this summit on Thursday, it certainly from the outside, it looks like the EU-China relationship is also in a very difficult place, and in fact, in a worse place than it was even 3 or 4 months ago. I can't hear you. Sorry. Did you hit mute?
Yeah. There was a lot of talk about a sort of rapprochement between the EU and China. And, the logic is, okay, if Trump turns hostile, if the United States turns hostile, then the EU and China maybe get closer together. I always thought that was a little bit reductive, because there's a lot of water under the bridge since 2017 when that did indeed happen. During Trump 1, the EU and China, they patched things up a little bit because they were both exposed to this sort of huge changes in the global trading system being driven from the United States. But yeah, I mean, the Chinese charm offensive was very insubstantive. It really didn't amount to anything. There was some nice words around the start. They did lift the sanctions on, some of the MEPs who had been under embargo since 2021. But they never really offered anything. And, there was from January, February, you had this situation where von der Leyen, who had been extremely hawkish on China for several years, she sort of turned about face in January with several speeches at the Davos, the World Economic Forum, and at a summit of EU ambassadors in Brussels in February, I think. And on both occasions, she said that the EU is open to deepening trade and investment ties with China. And anyone who'd ever heard her speak about China in the year or two before that was shocked, because it was very, very different, very flowery language. And there was an olive branch extended. And then we had the Munich Security Conference, at which sort of JD Vance came and, totally defenestrated the Europeans in their own backyard. And I was there, and it was humiliating, but it was also interesting to watch Wang Yi and sort of doing the rounds of all the foreign ministers who were there. He gave a speech. He didn't have to say very much to look reasonable next to JD Vance. It was the usual platitudes about hold up the multilateral order, etc. But that was the extent of it. I mean, they were waiting for an offer, I think, in Europe, and nothing really came. And there were several elements along the way that may have influenced this. I think that there was a sort of sense that China punched back very strongly against the United States, and that worked. The United States realized all of a sudden that Beijing had all this leverage, and they cut a deal in Geneva. And I talked to somebody in Paris when I was there last week in the ministry, and they said that when He Lifeng came from Geneva to Paris, they noticed an extreme difference in him. Just in terms of
more confident, more
absolutely, and because they had been working on a deal to end the brandy tariffs, these cognac tariffs that they'd done in response to the EV duties, but they noticed just there was a swagger, and the Chinese had sort of been emboldened by the success they had in dealing with Trump, and there was no way that they were going to give any concessions to the EU folks, and so all this stuff started. Whatever charm offensive had happened started to fade, and China's rhetoric toughened, and you see as a result of that, maybe in sort of April, May, June, the rare earth export restrictions started to kick in. But the Europeans then also started hardening their resolve, because they realized they weren't getting anything from China. Not just not getting anything, things were getting worse. Industry lines were grinding to a halt because of the rare earth restrictions. Yeah. So at the G7, von der Leyen in June started sort of reverting to type, I would say, talking about blackmailing and dominating and bullying in regards to China's weaponization of rare earths. And you've got to this stage where we're going into this summit with the lowest possible expectations. They're currently negotiating a joint statement on climate. And the latest that I had on that this afternoon was that the work is ongoing, but there are still substantial differences. If they can't get a joint statement on climate,
climate, that says a lot.
Yeah. So this is the lowest of the low-hanging fruit. Everything else is gone. There are no open lines negotiating on anything else. There won't be a big EV deal. There won't be a rare, well, unless the Chinese surprise them with something they're not expecting. But they're not expecting to have a big deal on EVs or rare earths. And so this climate statement is basically what the summit is hanging on. If that doesn't happen, then we had a briefing on Friday here in Brussels, and there was. I want to read this line because it's too bland to remember, but it's also perfect for encapsulating the low bar of expectation here in Brussels. This is from a senior EU official. The European deliverable is a substantive, open, direct, good, constructive conversation between the two of us on every aspect of this relationship. I mean, that's a deliverable, right? And that to me says it all. That's where we are.
Yeah, no, that is a pretty candid diplomatic speak for basically have low expectations for this meeting.
Yeah.
So on the rare earths, what's interesting, right, is because the U.S. side has. There's the Trump team went in with a lot of bluster in their negotiations with the Chinese side, and clearly it's become very clear. I mean, there's now been some reporting about it too that the U.S. underestimated the leverage the Chinese had, specifically around the rare earths and export controls, specifically around rare earth magnets. And I think that like you said, same here, right? There were production lines that were coming to a halt, and so. The U.S. tried to ratchet up the pressure at the same time with certain export controls that sort of got them back to London, and then everyone backed off. But the Chinese have only backed off. It's a 6-month deal for rare earths. The same leverage applies with the EU on rare earths. And so why would the Chinese even think they have to make any concessions? They can just dial up the controls on rare earth magnets and expect the EU to have to. I mean, because the EU can't actually. I mean, if the Chinese say, we're gonna cut off these magnets unless you give on some of these. What leverage does the EU actually have?
On this front, I don't think it has any leverage. I think it's going to be a long, drawn-out lesson. They talk about turning points and lines in the sand, and I think this is one. I mean, you can't unpick these dependencies overnight, but I think they're going to have to start trying in the next 10 years. I mean, depressing to say that timeline, but it is a 5-10 year exercise.
Right. And so for the Chinese, it's like they see an advantage. Why wouldn't they keep pressing?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the Chinese have. I have noticed this sort of different read from Brussels and Beijing. At the start, a lot of people in the European Union were saying, "Don't you know that China is heavily dependent on the European market? Now that the United States is closing down, that gives us leverage because these products have to go somewhere." And in a logical sense, that does ring true, right? So that the Chinese exporters do need the European market, but that leverage only makes sense if you're willing to weaponize it, which they're not. So the Chinese saw it very differently. So whereas we in Europe saw that China was on the ropes from the United States, China realized that Europe was also on the rope from the ropes from the United States, and in a worse position because they can't just unilaterally respond to anything. We have to go through the herding cats, the orchestrating of getting 27 member states to agree on anything, which can be messy and cacophonous. And so I think that you're right on the leverage point. I mean, Europe does have leverage, but the problem is it's not willing to use it. And I think the Chinese have worked that out very early on. And so it's not really live leverage, if you see what I mean.
Right. And that actually, I want to ask about Ukraine, right? Because you had that remarkable scoop that a bunch of other outlets, New York Times, confirmed your reporting, which was that when Wang Yi was in Europe a few weeks ago, I mean, I'll let you. He basically said, like, I'll let you quote it, but the idea was that the Chinese, are happy to see the U.S. effectively bogged down around the Ukraine issue because it distracts them from Asia.
Yeah, China doesn't want Russia to lose the war because otherwise America turns its guns on it towards Asia. Basically, it's in our backyard, something like that. And Yeah, I mean, it was a surprise. It was pretty stressful 24 hours when you put something out in the world like that, and there was a lot of vitriol traveling around the internet. I was
Oh
pleased
yeah,
when
yeah. People were questioning the reporting and saying,
yeah,
oh, they must have misinterpreted Wang Yi. But then, I mean, clearly a bunch of other. I mean, clearly it happened. And why? Why would he say that? Why would he admit it?
so two theories. One is sort of builds into the last conversation we were having about China having this swagger, and Wang Yi being in a room with somebody possibly doesn't like very much in Kaya Kalas, who has a very particular view of the world that probably doesn't align very much with Wang Yi's. She is the former Estonian prime minister. She's a Russia hawk, and she kept prodding him and prodding him and prodding him on Russia, to the point where he either uncharacteristically dropped his guard and just let this blurt out, or to the extent where he just thought, I'm going to teach this lady a thing or two about how the world really works. And that's where I land. I think that Wang Yi decided to take her down a peg or two in sort of how he would see this. One thing that strengthens that argument is that I heard that he also said it in one of the other European capitals to which he traveled on this trip. So he was also in Paris and Berlin.
So this wasn't some sort of he was jet lagged, he was tired, he sort of let things slip. This is actually a real, in some ways, almost just let's just be more candid about what's going on kind of approach.
I mean, who knows? I mean, look, we're all sort of trying to read inside a black box, but I mean I think, yeah, I mean, he's like, I'm not taking this crap anymore. You guys keep asking me to sort of shut down Russia, whereas what happens really if we do that, here's what happens. And I think it was a sense of perhaps a combination of him being provoked by Kalas, with also the fact that the sense of him giving her a geopolitical lecture. I mean, I have a few details on the lecture he was giving her. I mean, he started telling her about, if you ever look at a museum that has displays from both Europe and China, you'll notice that in the Chinese side, it's porcelain and it's silk and it's lots of things related to peace and to trade. But then if you go to the European arm, then it's all guns and tanks and and swords and stuff like this. You guys love war, but we love peace. So it was like a proper, diatribe over on a long time through which he said this. And it's, yeah, I mean, they weren't happy when this came out. I mean, there was big complaints from the Chinese mission to the EU.
Complaints saying that it wasn't accurate, or that it was misunderstood, or what?
I don't know what the extent. Just the fact that it was out in the open, I think that it had leaked. I think that they were unhappy about. I did hear then, and sort of like scooping myself from my story that's going out tomorrow morning.
Excellent. You heard it. You heard it here first.
That Wang and Kalas were in Kuala Lumpur the following week, and they sat near to each other at the ASEAN ministerial, and it was all very nice. Wang sort of smiled and was quite courteous to Kalas. There was no sense of like Xi Jinping at the G20 with Justin Trudeau,
right. Talking to a child.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wonder if there is a sense here that it wasn't the worst thing in the world from the Chinese perspective that this got out there, because it showed Wang as a tough guy moving through Europe, telling people what. So whereas for the working diplomats in Brussels, maybe it was a pain, but for Wang, maybe he's just sort of water off a duck's back for somebody with that.
Yeah, and just sort of rip off the Band-Aids. Why stop pretending? It was interesting though, like that. They trotted out Victor Gao, who was sort of one of he's on the approved list of sort of former
barbarian handlers.
Who can talk to foreign media, who they trotted him out. He talked to the New York Times, and he sort of said that what was attributed to Mr. Wang didn't make sense. And so it is sort of like clean up in aisle 6 in some ways, although it's not, he's not convincing. The interesting, the sort of I mean, I imagine Kalas is also not a fan given where she's from, and given the now, I think his official title is Special Representative of the PRC to the EU, Lou Charrière, the former ambassador to France, who basically negated the sort of sovereignty of some of the former Soviet republics, I think last year. I think you wrote about that, right?
Maybe 3 years ago, that was,
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it was quite as shocking that then the China, obviously the EU was unhappy with his comments, and then China then appoints him to be the special representative.
I know, and it was the weird thing is, I mean, go back to the bit about the charm offensive. It was literally the day after von der Leyen made one of those speeches offering the olive branch. Here's our response. But I suppose these things are probably baked in for a little while. I don't know if the timing was intentional or not. And I heard various theories about this. And for a big beast in the system like Liu Xiaoye, there's only a certain amount of jobs that can go to him. And they weren't. Yeah, I don't know why they did that, but yeah, again, it was quite counterproductive. He hasn't really made too many headlines since he took the role. Unless I've missed something, but no, it was a bizarre choice. But you're right. Yeah, I mean, Kallas is not a China person. I mean, she's never really focused on China through her career. She's never been a foreign affairs person. She was prime minister, and then she was an MEP before that. So steep learning curve. But I mean, by extension of her hawkishness on Russia, she is considered to be, a China hawk. I mean, she's considered to have in Brussels, geopolitically speaking, a one-track mind. You just Russia, 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 Russia. So Wang Yi sitting through 4 hours of this, you can sort of imagine there may be a breaking point, or a time where he just thought, right, that's it, lady. It's time to talk real talk. Let's
yeah. Well, I mean, good for her for drawing him out. I think in some ways, because I mean, it might as well have a more candid conversation and a recognition of reality.
Yeah, I think so.
But is there any sense? I mean, because I think certainly, the EU has been fairly slow until recently to sort of walk up and try and impose any cost on China for the support it's giving Russia. The US seems to have been a little bit further ahead than the EU in some areas. Do you think that sort of almost relative reticence on the EU part has also fed into the Chinese thinking that, again, we don't need to be nice because, again, we look at the EU as, they say they're going to do all these things, they talk tough, but in reality, they have their own constraints. And so we have more leverage than, and we might as well use it.
I think so. I mean, there's been a problem here in Brussels of talking about red lines that all of a sudden become grey lines or pink lines whenever they're crossed. There was a great example last year. I think it was like autumn, September, October last year, and a lot of stories. We did one from Brussels about how there was a drone factory in Xinjiang making drones for the Russian military. And this is big stuff. This is a meaningful support that is way beyond the dual use thing.
Right.
And so we were briefed by several very senior diplomatic sources that this was a big deal, and we're going to do something about this, and we're going to make sure that the issue is resolved. And they discussed it at a Foreign Affairs Council, which is like a monthly meeting of foreign ministers. And then all of a sudden, it went really quiet. And so I was trying to dig into this for ages, and it was after several weeks I found out that Zelensky had actually told them, shut up about this, because we get drones from the Chinese too. And secondly, we don't want China to be lumped into the same basket as North Korea and Iran, Belarus, because we feel like they figure in Ukraine, we're probably going to need China for something in the future, be it reconstruction or be it some sort of role in, if there's even a 0. whatever chance that they're going to be involved in peace talks or whatever. They were keen not to sort of tar China with that brush. But to me, that was a perfect example of a red line, the red line that had been crossed and that then all of a sudden faded into the background. There was
that's interesting.
Yeah, even on a more symbolic level, like the European Council is when the 27 leaders get together, happens every several months. They had one in, I think last month or end of June. Can't remember. It was around the time of the NATO summit. But I mean, the Germans didn't want to name China in the statement, which calls out countries for their support of Russia's war machine, because again, they keep falling back on this fact that Zelensky has said, don't throw China into the same basket as North Korea, Iran, and Belarus. To me, I think it was almost like convenient for Germany to have that fallback, because plenty of other countries in the room who are like equally, if not more close to Ukraine, were very happy to put them in that statement. Your Lithuanias and your Baltic countries
Right.
and the Czechs and all that. So, but to your point, I mean, there is this reluctance there has been from the European side to really go to town on China for their support. I mean, most of the listings in the sanctions packages so far have been like these 2-bit operators
Yeah.
in
Even
Shenzhen.
the 2 banks they added last week were, I mean, they're not meaningful banks in the PRC financial system.
No, but that's still interesting. I mean, how that
It is
was explained
interesting.
to me is like that's a shot across the bow. That's
Yeah.
like saying, guys, every other bank in China will now be looking at that and thinking,
Yeah.
well, okay, is this something we really want to get involved in? We've seen how, and this is the very first time that the EU have done this to Chinese banks. So I think it's a sort of a Rubicon moment for at least these sanctions, and the Chinese are very, very upset about it. I mean, this was one thing that Wang warned Callas. I was told 4 or 5 times during the meeting. He said, if you do this, there will be consequences.
So specifically warned about sanctioning banks.
2 banks. These 2 banks. They were specifically warned about these 2 banks. So this is the next thing that we're looking for. What is the sting in the tail from the Chinese side? Because even the ministry yesterday come out with a statement saying that whatever the line off by heart, I'm sure we would protect the interests of Chinese companies. So we'll wait and see if something happens there. But to me, that was obviously it's not like meaningful in terms of the actual economic impact, but it sends a warning shot, and it's going to incur something from the Chinese. That's when we'll see how much metal the Europeans have to follow up on.
I mean, it is meaningful also that if they were specifically, if Wang Yi specifically that don't do this, as you said several times, and they did it anyway, that is also again, that I mean, it's an interesting signal.
They did it with one caveat to that. They also agreed to review it after 6 months, so it does give the Chinese a get out of jail free card if they can go and prove that they've stopped this.
Right.
But I think that was, I don't know where that came about. I presume that Wang's intervention resonated at some level.
And so one thing on, if I can ask you, just shifting gears a little bit about the U.S. as their Trump administration is pursuing these trade deals. There is an effort to get countries to agree to certain sort of say additional tariffs on Chinese origin goods, Chinese goods being transshipped through their countries. What I've heard is that is something that the U.S. and the EU have been talking about, but that the EU's view is that they're actually doing the U.S. a favor if they agree to that. And the U.S. view is you need to do this because you're going to be overwhelmed by all these Chinese exports.
So
have you heard that?
So is it specifically about stopping transshipment and trade diversion?
Yeah, that's what I heard.
But the EU is already trying to do this. I mean, they are working on monitoring trade diversion, and that's in self-interest, as you say. They don't want to be flooded with all these goods. So, I mean, they are monitoring it. They have a surveillance team that are dedicated to this, and they release the stats every month and so on. So they are looking at it.
They're looking at it.
The EU would like to do more with the US on China, and they feel like the US just hasn't been that interested. Maybe they're not.
It's strange because this in some ways the current situation where the EU and the US appear to be at loggerheads is actually, if you're on the Chinese side, this I think gives you more confidence that you have a lot more running room with the EU because
totally.
I mean from the US it's like sitting here in DC, so you're just like, again, working together with the EU on China would cause the Chinese side many more problems and many more challenges, and yet Brussels and DC can't figure out how to do that, and that just helps the Chinese.
Totally. Well, I think the 4 or 5 months in the run up to the US election, I did a lot of reporting on this, and they were trying to convince the people in and around the Trump camp that it was a good idea for the EU and the US to work together on shared challenges, things like overcapacity, market distorting practices, all these, the greatest hits.
Right.
Obviously, and then standards and like TTC related stuff, the setting the rules of the road, and they wanted to keep that alive. And they never knew if they were talking to the right people. And I think there's a sort of element of chaos in and around Trump, particularly before he came into office.
There still is.
Well, they exactly they figured out that basically it doesn't matter who you're talking to because Trump can just change his mind and then they change their mind, and sort of people
Yeah.
try and retrofit solutions to whatever it is that he's decided to do in the morning. But I think that there was appetite from the Europeans to continue what they were doing with Biden, right, which was to work together on economic security issues, to compare notes on overcapacity and see if there's something that could be done at the G7 level. But I think that the longer Trump goes on like this, the more difficult it will be for the Europeans to do anything with
Right.
him.
And I know the Biden side, they were also frustrated where they felt the Europeans weren't moving fast enough. And I think there's a sort of an element here in the Trump administration, like, we've been trying for years and they just aren't, like, we can't bother to be nice anymore because they just weren't getting on board.
Well, I think there's also frustration from the European side that
of course
the Biden administration, you want them to work with you. You wouldn't even remove the Trump era tariffs on steel and aluminium. That should be a sort of like gateway to opening up more cooperation. So, I mean, there's probably plenty of blame to go around. I mean, the Europeans are slow is not breaking news. I mean, that's just the way Europe works. It will always be that way. They can't move in the way the US and China do because they have 27 countries,
Right.
And so that's always going to be the problem. And, but if you were to look where Europe was 4 or 5 years ago on China and where it is now, they're not in Kansas anymore. It's totally new, totally different. The fact that they're sanctioning Chinese banks, the fact that they're, considering, the cancelling economic dialogues ahead of summits and stuff like this, and talking about things like screening outbound investments into China. I mean, that sort of stuff just wasn't on anyone's bingo card in 2020 when they were signing the comprehensive agreement on investment. So it is moving slowly, but there's a danger of not seeing the wood for the trees. China is sort of percolating through EU policy like never before. An example would be that in last week's budget, so they proposed a new $2 trillion budget to sort of do the 7 years from 2028. And of course, going through it with a fine-tooth comb and the sort of liberal use of Control F, you can see lots of references to China in there without it ever being named. So, like, there's lots of stuff about how none of this money should go towards non-trusted suppliers, non-trusted vendors, and stuff, unreliable vendors and suppliers and stuff like that. So it's sort of percolating through a lot of this really boring EU policy in a way that just doesn't generate headlines in the way that, say, Trump does, or even like the big blockbuster EV stuff. But it's there.
This is how the bureaucracy and this is how the block moves, right?
Exactly.
It's a real shift. Okay.
Yeah, it can only move in this way, particularly because there's only certain things that Brussels has competency for. The rest of it has to sort of go through member states. So they propose a lot of stuff and they put it in, cloaked language, and then they see what comes out at the other end of the sausage factory.
Right. And I guess some of that language could be applied to the U.S. now, at least from some
this is it's the beauty of why the anti-coercion instrument is it's the story of this piece of legislation is actually quite interesting. It started out as a response to Trump's 301 or 232 tariffs, I can't remember, in the first term, and then China came along and coerced Lithuania. So all of a sudden it was quite useful to be developing this anti-coercion instrument, and it became very popular then and was developed quite quickly. And now all of a sudden sort of come full circle and they're talking about using it against Trump. It's never been used. So it would be quite ironic if it came all the way back to being used against Trump after all the stuff that China's been up to in the intervening 4 or 5 years.
That would be unfortunate on a bunch of levels. Well, I want to be cognizant of your time, and I know you're busy and you got a lot of work to do before and during the summit. I just have a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Please, I've got time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one is on the tariffs on the EVs, on the Chinese EVs, and the broader discussion of, the West, the US, the EU talks about Chinese exporting overcapacity. Of course, the Chinese are, it's so-called overcapacity doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Germany exports most of the cars it makes and exports a lot from China. So it's not fair to blame the Chinese for overcapacity. Recently, we had, I think it was the foreign ministry spokesman. I think it was in response to think it was in response to von der Leyen's speech, where it basically said that when she talked about rebalancing, where they said the EU needs to rebalance its mindset, which I'm sure went over really well.
Yeah.
Where are? I mean, you said there should be no expectations in this for this the summit on Thursday of any real breakthrough in the EVs. Where are they on tariffs on Chinese EVs? And I mean, is there a chance they go up, or this is the numbers we're at, and they're just going to keep that for a while now?
No, I think there's not a chance it goes up after the bun fight they had to get these tariffs in place, and there was a real
and especially Germany didn't want them, right?
Yeah, you don't want to open that can of worms again. You don't. I think the Commission landed on those levels. I mean, it's not like how the US did it. It was like, oh, we had a look at this, and we worked out that actually the tariff should be 100%. The EU did a proper investigation, and it was WTO compliant, which everything they do has to be. And they landed on the numbers that they did. So I think it would be a huge pain to open it up again. As for whether there will be a deal, I've been told that there's no deal in the works. Nothing has moved significantly since last October. You've seen all these mischievous stories in Yu and Tantian and
that's
so
the
on.
CCTV WeChat account.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how they disseminate that as well. They send them out they send out translated versions to all the Western journalists to make sure that they pick it up. So those are obviously trying to steer the narrative in a certain direction. The sort of EV situation, okay, how that would be resolved would be to agree on a price undertaking arrangement, which would be effectively a minimum price for each EV model being exported from China to the EU. It's quite complicated. It would have to be dynamic to deal with new models coming online and all that, but it is doable. But the situation hasn't changed since October because the EU has always said, well, you know what you have to do. So the only way I could see it changing would be Xi Jinping puts his finger in the air, feels the wind blowing in a certain direction, and much like he did with the Kai in 2020, decided that this was the time to do a deal with the Europeans. I still don't expect it to happen. From the European perspective, a deal wouldn't make any economic sense because it would exactly have to replicate what the tariffs do. So you're just swapping one such arrangement for another. It might make sense if it meant that China called off its brandy probe, dairy probe, pork probe, and rare earths. But then what's the precedent that you're setting? Especially as you see that, for example, I think I read before we logged on here that US and China negotiators are going to be meeting again in Stockholm next week or in Sweden next week. The Trump deadline of August 1st is hanging over the EU. So to do a deal like that would be geopolitically suicidal, I think, from the European perspective, although with the caveat that, technically it could happen, but I think it's unrealistic. Yeah.
And it is interesting. Trump has already signaled that they're willing to extend the deadline for the US-China talks. But not for the EU. It doesn't sound like. Although again, anything could happen.
Well, I mean, when he and I think when Trump and Xi, they look at Europe and they probably just see weakness, right? They probably think that this is a place that can't get its act together. It won't punch back. I mean, there's that famous 2018 quote from Ling Wei's reporting about, you people in the West think that when you get punched on the left cheek, you turn the other one. We like to punch back here or something like that. Remember, it was Xi Jinping quote to Western business executives. But at the same time, I do have to commend the Europeans. As a European, I know that it looks weak, and it can be very weak. And, I think it's been weak towards Trump, for example. But I look at the pressure that has been on. They could have very easily just given up the EV tariffs in exchange for the rare earth restrictions and set a really horrible precedent. But they haven't, at least not so far. Maybe I'll have to eat my words on Friday or something. But I do think that in times gone by that maybe there would have been sort of little dirty deals done on this sort of stuff. But I think they've stood their ground. They've not just that. They've sanctioned the 2 banks last week. They've continued with the procurement plan to kick out Chinese medical device companies and so on. So I think that at a really difficult time, and when they've been under pressure from the two world superpowers, they've held the line on the China stuff, I think, quite well.
And so related to that is, what's Germany's role here, and specifically, what has Germany's position really shifted since Merz took over from Chancellor Scholz, or is it also part of this evolution that was underway anyway?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, it's very early for Merz, but I mean, he made some of the right noises. He's less flowery in his language than Olaf Scholz. I don't want to get carried away, because I was very excited the last time the new government came in with the coalition and the Greens were involved, and there was lots of very tough language, and then it came to naught. So I feel like Merz, one thing I'm watching, Merz has basically pivoted on the United States, according to the reporting in Bloomberg and others. Like, they're saying that they're sort of more on the French line of let's punch back. And if Merz is willing to punch back against the United States, which is a much closer ally, it's an ally, right? It's a NATO ally. There are American troops in Germany. There are, Germany's biggest trading partner is now the United States. So if they're willing to flip on the United States, then perhaps that shows a broader geopolitical shift. We haven't seen it yet. But I mean, the German-China policy has been dictated for the last several decades by a handful of big companies who have made hay. They've made an absolute killing in China. And, it's been, I suppose, good. It has been good for Germany too. But I think as you start to see some of these companies close their European factories and then open and expand in China, the question will be asked more and more, is what's good for these big 6-7 German companies good for the German economy writ large? And should they really be allowed to continue to dictate the China policy? At the start, I was skeptical because Merz is from the corporate world, he's sort of bank guy. But we'll see. I mean, he sort of seems to be a bit more geopolitically literate than Scholz.
Interesting. I mean, we'll see, right? Huawei's still involved in Germany, right? There are all these other bits that are. But so what else should I have asked you, or what other points do you want to make before I let you go? Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I would just sort of think that this is an incredibly low ambition summit. Things have not panned out as many people thought in January. I mean, things have gotten much worse. There's been several, there's the sort of rare earths element. The overcapacity thing has become more acute because of the trade diversion risk from the United States. There's the sort of deepening in Russia-China ties. There's the Huawei spying scandal in the European Parliament. There's a cyber attack in the Czech Republic. There's all of these trade probes that we already mentioned. There's the
Taiwan that comes up occasionally.
Yeah, it comes up not very often in Europe, but it's a frustration of mine, even in self-interest. If there's something bad that's going to happen in the Taiwan Strait, Europe should be planning in self-interest to sort of try and shield its own economy, but they're not even allowed to talk about it. There's this weird foible of EU politics where Cyprus keeps blocking the addition of Taiwan to any official agenda at the European Council, because many years ago, a Chinese diplomat in Turkey and a Turkish minister started talking about the Taiwan solution for northern Cyprus, whereby it would be admitted to certain multilateral fora in the way that Taiwan has. And this has entirely hijacked official debate in Europe and planning processes for come what may in the Taiwan Strait. It's a classic case of the sort of herding cats that I mentioned earlier.
I did not know that. That is fascinating.
Yeah, it's a weird little situation. But yeah, I mean, the point I think I was going to make is that things have gone counter to what a lot of people predicted, and I think that that neither China has not been in the mood for giving concessions, and I don't think that's going to change for the reasons that you outlined. China sees Europe as weak, and we'll see.
And they have building out this export control regime around rare earths. They actually have built an incredibly effective mechanism that gives them huge amounts of leverage.
Totally.
At some point, it won't work anymore if people get their act together outside of China. But that some point, as you said, is years away.
It is, but the threat to the long-term EU-China relationship from this is real. I mean, this is a sort of, in all choke points, everybody finds a workaround eventually, and this one is particularly difficult. And you see the EU running around the world trying to sign trade deals with anybody who might have some rare earths, but it's a long haul. But I mean, I do think that there's been several moments down the years in the EU-China relationship which has really changed how people think about it. COVID, okay, a lot of the world changed their view. The coercion of Lithuania, when Chinese companies in 2016 were hoovering up, the crown jewels of the European tech sector, a lot of these things eventually lead to, certain legislation. And I'm not sure what you can do to legislate on rare earths, but they certainly changed the mindset. The Russia and the China's support for Russia being the most egregious example of this. I feel like the rare earths one is going to be sort of in that upper echelon of the greatest hits that people are talking about whenever they're now wondering where did it all go wrong between Europe and China.
Interesting. No, I mean, there must be as I think it's settled over DC and over the last few years, it's sort of a lot of kind of just frustration about the state of relations with China and where things were headed. And it's just, one of the things just not being in Europe but it's hard looking from the outside. It's hard to see how the relationship gets better.
I know.
It's more about how they just figure out how to manage an increasingly friction-filled relationship.
They do need to manage it because, I mean, here in Europe, we need the rare earths, we need the batteries, we need the EVs. I mean, unlike in America, the American government, we actually genuinely want these things on the road, and we can't make the batteries ourselves. So, I mean, that's an area in which there could be something constructive, joint ventures that people talk about a reverse dung. Around the time that people were talking about a reverse Kissinger in the US, people in Europe were talking about a reverse Deng Xiaoping. So there's a long way to go before that happens. But I mean, there are things that could improve. Just right now, it feels like things are not rock bottom, but they're not good.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to your next scoops. I'm sure
Me too.
Finbarr. Finbarr is a must-read covering the EU-China relations, and I really appreciate your time. I know you've gotten on Substack on Notes. You're great. You're a great contributor to Substack Notes. It's great to see you on there. I hope you get less vitriol than you do on, say, X these days.
I do. That's why I'm there, because I don't get the hate mail yet, but it'll come.
There are the sort of the bot attacks haven't really started yet in terms of. I mean, you post anything on X on China about China on X. And
no, it's so toxic. It's so toxic. It looks as though you do start to see a lot of the names I see popping up on Substack now, with their either by having their own newsletter or just posting on the chat. I mean, it does look much healthier, and it looks like a lot of the people that I know and sort of respect.
And I'm hopeful. I think the challenge is once it, as it gets bigger, it then attracts the folks who want to sort of. It's maybe not worth their investment yet, but then at some point it becomes worth the investment. I mean, you already see there's a lot of state PRC party state media activities around Substack, and that has been increasing. So we'll see about the other stuff, but so far at least I find that sort of the China discussions on Substack much better than on X at this point.
Absolutely.
So, glad you're on there. Spend more time there.
That's right. Thank you. Everybody else tells me to spend less time on social media, but look, thank you for having me. I'm sorry about the technical issue. We said jokingly before people were watching that I didn't look like I was in prison. I think I probably do now.
No. It looks good. I don't have a professional video background yet either. If we do more of these,
yours looks better than mine. I'm gonna next time we talk, I'll be sure to have the bookcase and everything in place.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, and
pleasure.
We'll be in touch. And everyone, thank you for watching, and then this will go out as a podcast sometime later on today's Tuesday. And I will put links to Finbarr's Substack presence as well as his recent articles, and definitely go follow him on. I think you can follow people on South China Morning Post, so follow you on over at southchinamorningpost.com. But definitely also follow you on Substack. So thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And if there is any hate mail or comments, you please direct them towards Bill rather than myself.
Thank you. Thanks everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.